He was brilliant and he knew it. That was part of the problem. He was born in 354 in a backwater town in North Africa, a Roman province called Numidia, in what is now Algeria. His hometown of Thagast was small and unremarkable, the kind of place ambitious people are from but never stay in. His father was a minor Roman official, perpetually stretched thin, trying to keep the family's finances afloat. His mother was a deeply religious woman who had prayed over him since before he could walk, and who saw in her brilliant, restless son something he could not yet see in himself. His father scraped together every coin he could to send the boy to school in Carthage, the second largest city in the Roman Empire, a thundering port city of merchants, philosophers, pleasure seekers, and political operators. It was, as the boy himself would later write, with a kind of dark affection, a cauldron of sin. He arrived at 16, wide-eyed and hungry, and Carthage swallowed him whole. He was good at everything that mattered in that world. He had a natural gift for rhetoric, the art of persuasion, the craft of well-built argument delivered with a devastating elegance. In the Roman Empire, rhetoric was power. Lawyers used it, politicians lived by it, emperors needed it. A young man with genuine talent for words and ideas could rise very quickly, and this young man had genuine talent in abundance. He also had appetites that matched his ambitions. He fell in with a crowd of young men who competed with each other in a particular currency. Stories of conquest, who had been with whom, how many, how often. He was eager to belong, and not yet brave enough to be honest about the gap between what he'd done and what he claimed. He would later write about this period with scorching self-honesty, how he sought acceptance through boasting, how he performed a version of himself that the crowd would admire, how the pressure to be seen as experienced pushed him toward actually becoming what he pretended to be. He took a woman as his companion. She was from Carthage. He never recorded her name in his writings, perhaps out of a complicated mixture of protection and grief. And she gave him a son. He was a young man with a child, a blazing academic career, and a growing addiction to the feeling of being the most interesting person in the room. He was also, though he would have laughed at the word, searching. The searching showed up first in books. At around 20, he stumbled into a philosophical dialogue by Cicero called Hortensius, a work now lost in history, but which, in his own words, enkindled in his heart the love of wisdom and a great thirst for truth. Something cracked open. All the rhetorical dazzle, all the social climbing, all the pleasures of Carthage suddenly felt thin against this new hunger. He wanted to know what was actually true, not what impressed people, not what won arguments, what was real. He turned first to the scriptures his mother had given him and dismissed them. The Latin translation he read seemed crude and unsophisticated compared to the polished classical prose he admired. He was a literary snob, and the Bible offended his taste. He turned instead to a religious movement called Manichaeism, which offered him something deeply appealing, a clean intellectual system that divided the universe into forces of light and forces of darkness, with a sophisticated mythology built on top. It had a feel of philosophy without demanding the same moral accountability as Christianity. He could be a seeker of truth and still, for now, be exactly who he already was. He stayed with the Manichaeans for nearly a decade. Meanwhile, the career accelerated. He moved from Carthage to Rome and then to Milan, the most prestigious academic appointment in the Latin-speaking world. At 30 years old, he held the chair of rhetoric for the imperial court of Milan, and he had arrived. He had everything a young man from a backwater North African town could possibly have wanted. Yet, he was miserable in a way he couldn't quite name. Milan was where he encountered Bishop Ambrose, one of the greatest preachers of the age. He went to hear Ambrose the way a professional musician might attend a rival's concert, as a student of craft, not a seeker of truth. He wanted to observe the technique, but Ambrose was doing something unexpected with a scripture that had once seemed crude to him. He was reading it philosophically, allegorically, with a depth and intellectual sophistication that caught the young rhetorician completely off guard. The Bible, he began to realize, was not what he had assumed it was. The Manichaean structure had been crumbling for years. He had finally met the great Manichaean bishop, Faustus of Mileve, the man whose wisdom was supposed to answer all his questions, and found him charming but intellectually hollow. A performer, not a thinker, he had recognized the type because he had often been the type himself. Now he was 30. He had a prestigious career and a hollow space in his chest that pleasure and ambition had never managed to fill. His mother had followed him to Milan. She was that kind of mother, and was relentlessly, quietly, joyfully certain that her brilliant, wandering son would find his way home. She had been praying for him for decades. She had been told by a bishop early on, when she wept over her son's spiritual state, that a child of so many tears could not be lost. She believed that. She kept praying. She kept waiting. He was not ready yet. His engagement with Christianity was growing, but something in him knew that to follow it fully would require giving up the life he had built. His pleasures, the comfortable arrangements. He was smart enough to understand exactly what surrender would cost, and he was not yet willing to pay it. He wrote down his prayer from this period. He wrote it down because it was true, and he was, at least in his private hours, ruthlessly honest with himself. Lord, grant me chastity and continence, but not yet. He meant it. That is the thing. It was not cynicism or comedy. It was the truest thing he had ever said about himself. He wanted to be good. He wanted God. He wanted to be free of the chains he had spent 15 years building around himself. But not yet. He was 31. He was one of the most celebrated intellectuals in the Roman world. He had everything, and something or someone was not finished with him. This is part one of a two-part story. The identity of this man will be revealed at the end of part two. Stay tuned.